Well, good evening. I'm Charles Schultz, and this is the Randomizer. And tonight we're going to be looking at a very interesting term. We've all heard of Silicon Valley, but very few people know of its equivalent in the UK, the Silicon Fen. There's a very interesting story behind that, and it goes right to the roots of the connections between academics and industry. And so we'll discuss that very shortly. It's a fascinating story and one that's very apropos and probably could lead us to make some things happen a little better in our society with a little bit of forethought and planning. Um, anyway, I'm going to encourage everybody to go to schultzlaboratories.com or universesciencecenter.com, visit our pages, walk through our galleries in 3D, and have a look at our virtual science center and everything in it and all the cool things we can do with it. Walk around, explore, play with the things, the interactive stuff, and get your kids in there. If you're doing classes and you need a specialty lesson, we can set up a course for you. If you're homeschooling, we can do the same thing. If you have specific lessons you need to teach to, let's say you're running a company and people in there need to operate certain machinery, we can set simulations up for you to do that. If you're an educator and you wish to share your skills, we can set up a gallery or a classroom for you, demonstrating how you do what you do, sharing what you know with others who'd like to learn it from you, and also seeing displays of some of your works. So it's a virtual world and a really useful and fun one, and one we're trying to expand every day. Go in, sign up with us, become a member and support our growth, and join our classes. Mondays, 9 p.m. We're starting robotics up this coming Monday. It's going to happen pretty fast, and it's going to be fascinating. Historical retrospective and a look at the technology and how to build them yourself. Programming, hardware, energy systems, sensors, brains, the whole thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. And also, every weekday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Randomizer, random technical terms are pulled out, kicked around, and talked about. We have a lot of fun with it. So let's get on with the Silicon Fen and talk to all of you about what it's all about. So I know that a lot of people who are aware of Silicon Valley know about the huge influence it's had on technology in the United States. And the fact that we have so many startup companies, mostly in semiconductors, electronics, computing, the whole digital age seems to be emanating from this one location. Now, if you're an academic, you probably know of the presence of basically Stanford University. That would come right off the tip of the tongue if you were thinking about the Silicon Valley, and the fact that it's located right there. We know about the cross-pollination of thinkers and industry and intellect and how it causes new ideas to simply explode, and many of them become, well, new companies, new products or services, things we didn't imagine before. And this is a great idea to take things that we know nothing about, get a lot of people who are hobbyists who are just burned in there, they want to make the best contribution, they're researching something you can't imagine, and bang, the lights come on and have some new idea. Well, there is an equivalent to Silicon Valley that exists in the United Kingdom. And it turns out that it's called the Silicon Fen. Now, a lot of people aren't familiar with the term fen, but a fen is basically a marsh. And in England, in the UK, there is an area called the Southern Fenlands, and basically it's a huge marshy area. And parts of it have been set aside and drained and turned into useful land for other purposes. A lot of people consider it I'd say a clean industries area. Some energy, communications, light manufacturing, basically none of the big industrial things where you have to be trucking materials and processes and devices in and out, but a quiet sort of industrial area. And the big school in this particular area is Cambridge University. Now, back in 1970, the Trinity College decided that it would be well worth their effort to start what they called a science park, the Cambridge Science Park to be exact. And what they did is they took this one area of the drained fen and they began setting up connections for companies that deal in technical subjects or products. And a lot of companies have been there, and I'll list a few of them in just a moment. I'm sure you'll recognize some of them. Well, this effort made what they called a connection between the intellectual side of things and industry, science and industry. So they wanted to see linkages between them because they knew that it would benefit both. Now, there's a very curious mindset that occurs in the academic community, and it is this. Many professors feel that the intellectual pursuits should not be sullied by industry or business or money. They feel that somehow it destroys the purity of research. They don't see themselves as having to provide solutions or end problems for somebody or solve problems. Instead, they see it as basically what a lot of people would think of as an ivory tower pursuit, knowledge for knowledge's sake. But somebody has to butter the bread and pay the bills. And so, as hard as it is for some of them to admit, this actually is a good thing. So, when you set up an industrial park, and you have technical products, it's a different sort of animal than running like forklifts and casting steel and doing a lot of things along these lines. It tends to be a quieter sort of business, but still quite a bit of business. It turns out that in 2019, in this particular park, Amazon tested their initial drone delivery service in the town that has sprung up in this area around these businesses. And also, Apple opened a new AI lab not long after that, right in 2019. There's an immense amount of growth. To put things in perspective, there are nearly 5,000 high tech companies. I knew of at least 4,700 the last time I looked that have brought in a total tax revenue, or I should say a turnover, of about $15 billion per year at this point. Um, the tax revenue generated by the Silicon Fen and the companies located within it is roughly half, not quite half, of the science and research money available in the UK for, well, the UK's government backing for science and engineering and technology. So half of that money basically comes from the taxes generated in this area. So you can see that it's very economically successful. Now it's interesting because when you look at that sort of growth and you wonder what comes out of it, you have to ask yourself what sort of companies would get established in an area like that. And I've got a brief list here. Acorn was one of the earlier companies, and then later Solexa, the energy company, and then SwiftKey, which was a software development company, Raspberry Pi. Anybody who develops devices using the Raspberry Pi computer understands how powerful and flexible they are. These things are really, these days, not much bigger than a credit card and have the same function and wow, all the abilities of a desktop PC. You can plug in 55-inch video monitors, you get Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all built into this little thing about not much bigger than this. And they only cost 30, 40 bucks tops in most cases. They'll run high res graphics. They'll run almost any software package you can imagine. So small cost, small form factor, small power consumption. It's really hard to go wrong with something like the Raspberry Pi. And that's just one of the companies that established in that area. So as many people can understand, a lot of the automated hardware we build today depends on computer brains that are small enough and low power enough to operate them successfully. So you're going to find a lot of connections here. Now, a few years back, there was a fellow by the name of Alec Broers. He was a scientist. Actually, he worked with IBM as an electrical engineer, and he later became Lord Broers through some of the things he did. He created an electron microscope when he was a student at Cambridge, and it actually turned out that his expertise grew and grew, and he made connections with other companies and encouraged them to come in. He actually, he said it was a low spot in his career when he was informed that he had been awarded in 2001 Businessman of the Year by some local companies and news reporting agencies. To think of that as being the low spot of your career. And it was because of this academic disdain for the fact that he was working in a tainted field now that he had brought money into the equation. But he actually was able to get a number of companies to join and help the area grow. So when you really think about it, a career in which you solve problems and find solutions to things seems to me in some ways just as, if not more, honorable than one in which you simply sit back and write some equations from which nothing comes. And I don't mean to express my disdain for an academic mindset. I just feel that we have a responsibility to use the tools we have to make things a little better. So when we compare the two, Silicon Valley in the US and the Silicon Fen in the UK, we find that there are some differences in the sorts of products that are produced in the UK. A lot of it tends to focus on software and information in many cases, but in fact, such as the Raspberry Pi, the small single board computers, there's a huge and growing market for that. Personally, I have not used the Raspberry Pi, although I am tempted to buy a few and use them as distributed processors for some stuff. A lot of the times I use the Arduino cards and understand that the Arduinos are also quite capable. Some of them are super cheap, like 20 bucks or less. So you look at what your needs are. But all of these things were developed by the geeks who sit down and say, wouldn't it be great if we had a tiny computer with a tiny form factor that does this job for you or is universally reassignable? And when you see how many companies seem to flourish in the environment where there's a cross-pollination between intellectual students who have a huge interest in practical solutions and companies who need to employ them. I mean, think of the advantages if you had been at a college where as soon as you graduated, there were 5 or 10 or 15 companies right there knocking on the door waiting to hire you. And so I can see some real advantages to having a town like that. Now, there are places in the US that have done this. They have actually set aside industrial parks specifically around college communities in the hopes that this sort of achievement will be, this sort of achievement will occur. And this is something that we should really focus on. We don't really put a lot of thought into intellectual pursuits these days. It seems that everything is more aimed at making a fast buck or making entertainment systems or products, and very few with solving our problems. And a lot of times we'll see something like an X Prize for something or other, an X Prize for developing a certain thing. There's a Lunar X Prize that was running for a while. There was a Google X Prize. There have been for self-driving vehicles, the DARPA challenges. There are many sorts of challenges or prizes that are awarded for solving a particularly tough problem. It probably would be a great thing if more of our communities would focus on getting the resources and connections together to focus on things such as recycling the contents of landfills or cleaning up and fixing the poisoned oceans and getting new developments in recycling or energy or whatever. I mean, I can think of a dozen things that would be hugely beneficial if we simply devoted our thought and our energies to solving those problems. And here's the thing. For many intellectual pursuits, we never really know if what we're studying is going to answer the question or if it's even related. But the strange thing is, when we do random intellectual research, we often stumble across an answer to something not realizing it. And it isn't until somebody else looks at it and says, hey, I've been looking for exactly this. And this is called a serendipitous discovery, where you simply walk in, you see a thing and go, oh, wait a minute, this is what I'm looking for. And this reminds me of something very strange. A lot of times people think of a scientist or inventor as somebody who's working on something and all of a sudden they yell, Eureka! And they have this solution, the Archimedes story. But you know what? As many people have pointed out, it isn't the scientist going, Eureka! That's not the moment. Usually, the moment of discovery crystallizes when they're doing something and they go, that doesn't look right. That's weird. You see, recognizing when you have an unexpected result is usually the first step toward finding a solution to a problem. And again, you may never even know what that problem is or that it is a solution, but when you make an unusual discovery, you can bet that somebody's going to find it useful. So, I guess on that note, I would say if anybody has any questions about the Silicon Fen or the whole concept of combining universities and industry in this manner, the floor is open. And meanwhile, I'm going to encourage people to go to schultzlaboratories.com or universeciencecenter.com and explore our galleries, become a member, help support our growth, and join us for our classes. And I think that there's a lot of things here that you would really enjoy. I know a lot of people don't look at intellect and learning as a fun pursuit, but I can assure you that if you haven't walked through our 3D world and seen what's available there, you'll be very pleasantly surprised. So join with us and help support our growth and become a member and put your 2 cents in. Talk to us, send us your ideas, your questions, whatever it takes. Let's establish a dialogue and see how we can all benefit from creating a virtual learning environment that anyone on earth can reach. So, meanwhile, I don't see any questions on the floor. What I will do, however, is I'll read my quote for the day. And it is, "As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He is a shield to all who trust in him." This is Psalms 18:30. And again, very comforting words. I think that if all of us could just kind of take a moment and just stop worrying, just be grateful for the things that we have seen in our lives, the things that we have, and the things that we know we could do. That moment of peace may be all you need to set your day right. So, well, no questions, no suggestions or comments, and I suppose that this discussion of the Silicon Fen has yielded some fruit, and I hope that it was an interesting discussion. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in the next randomizer. And by the way, the randomizer links are being placed in our library, so you can go back and look at all of the other randomizer episodes simply by clicking the links and binge, watch them all, have fun with it. Anyway, everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you for showing up here. I'm Charles Schultz with the Randomizer, and have a wonderful evening and make the world a better place. Thank you.